Hey everyone, tonight we're diving deep, not into the sands of the desert, but into something far more enticing, perhaps even a little crumbly. We're going to be unveiling the secret snack recipes of Egyptian pharaohs. Imagine, if you will, the sheer opulence. You're probably picturing gold and lapis lazuli, but I want you to picture the royal pantry, the ancient equivalent of that forbidden snack drawer you swear you'll only visit once tonight. Think less about grand pyramids for a moment, and more about the midnight munchies of a king or queen who literally commanded an empire. What did they reach for when they needed a little pick-me-up after a long day of, being a living god? It's a delicious thought, isn't it? Though, let's be honest, with some of the ingredients and preservation techniques back then, if you were suddenly transported to a pharaoh's snack table, you might politely ask for a glass of water and a quick exit. You probably wouldn't survive this, at least not without a modern stomach and a good travel-sized hand sanitizer. Seriously, some of those ancient brews could probably power a small chariot. So, before you get too comfortable, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It really does help the channel, and lets me know you're out there, hopefully getting sleepy. Feel free to share where you're listening from and what time it is for you in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see where our little historical wanderings reach. Now, let's dim the lights, maybe get a fan going for some gentle white noise, and begin our journey for tonight. Act 1. You find yourself stepping out of the harsh, bright sunlight, not into a grand, echoing throne room lined with imposing statues, but into a surprisingly bustling, warm, and aromatic space. This, you realize, is the heart of the royal palace's food preparation complex, a sprawling area dedicated to satisfying the divine palate. The air is thick, almost heavy, but in an inviting way, rich with the intermingled scents of freshly baked bread, the sweetness of ripe fruits, a hint of roasting meats from a distant courtyard, and the faintest whisper of exotic spices you can't quite name. It's a far cry from the sterile, stainless steel kitchens you might imagine for modern royalty. This place feels alive, earthy, and profoundly ancient. The walls around you are made of sun-dried mud brick, plastered and perhaps once painted with simple motifs, though now they are mostly smoke-stained and worn smooth by centuries of use. Along these walls, rough-hewn wooden shelves are laden with an astonishing variety of clay jars, pots, and amphorae of all conceivable shapes and sizes. These aren't dusty museum pieces behind glass. These are working vessels, holding the very treasures we've come to investigate, the ingredients for a pharaoh's delight. Some are massive, requiring 2 people to lift, while others are small enough to cradle in one hand, likely containing precious spices or rare extracts. You can almost hear the faint hum of activity, the distant clatter of pottery, the murmur of voices, speaking a language that has long since faded from common use. Your eyes adjust to the dimmer light filtering in from high, narrow windows, shafts of dusty sunlight illuminating floating particles of flour and steam. The sheer scale of this operation is impressive. This isn't just a kitchen, it's a small city dedicated to food. You realize that feeding a pharaoh, their family, their court, and the vast retinue of priests, officials, and servants was a monumental daily undertaking. A mainstream historical fact is that bread and beer were the absolute staples of the ancient Egyptian diet, for rich and poor alike, forming the basis of their rationing system and even their wages. Workers on the Giza pyramids, for example, were paid in daily allotments of bread and beer. It was, quite literally, the fuel that built empires. As you venture further in, you pass an area dedicated to baking. The warmth intensifies here. Several large conical clay ovens, their tops open, radiate a fierce heat. Bakers, their bodies lean and muscular, their faces and arms dusted with a fine white powder of emmer wheat and barley flour, move with a practiced rhythm. You see them expertly kneading large mounds of dough on low wooden tables, their movements economical and strong. The rhythmic thump, thump, thump of dough being worked is a constant, comforting beat in this ancient symphony of sustenance. They don't have stand mixers here. This is all done with sheer human effort. Some are shaping simple, round flatbreads, tossing them onto hot stones set around the edges of the ovens, while others are tending to more complex, leavened loaves, perhaps enriched with a little honey or a handful of dates, which will bake more slowly within the ovens themselves. You might notice dozens of different types of bread molds, pottery forms in various shapes, fish, human figures, simple rounds, indicating a surprising variety in bread presentation. It wasn't just about filling bellies, there was an artistry to it, even in these fundamental foodstuffs. And then there's the beer. Forget your modern light, fizzy lagers or hoppy IPAs. The beer here, known as Henket, was a different beast entirely. It was often thick, almost like a porridge or a thin gruel, cloudy and only mildly alcoholic. It was brewed from barley or emmer wheat, sometimes with dates or other flavorings added, and was considered a highly nutritious food source as much as a beverage. You see large vats where the brewing process is underway, the air around them carrying a slightly sweet, fermented aroma. It was likely safer to drink than untreated Nile water, which could be fraught with perils. An odd detail is that some Egyptologists believe certain beer brews were specifically made to be strained through specialized pottery sieves at the point of consumption to remove the coarse grains and leave a smoother liquid. It's a bit like having to assemble your drink, isn't it? Some assembly required should have been on the label. Historians still debate the exact range of alcoholic strengths and the precise brewing techniques for different types of Egyptian beer. While we have recipes and depictions of brewing, the nuances of fermentation, temperature control, and the specific strains of yeast available naturally are all subjects of ongoing research and sometimes spirited academic disagreement. Did they have craft breweries for the palace, producing higher quality or uniquely flavored beers for the pharaoh's table, distinct from the everyday brew of the masses? It seems likely, but the specifics remain tantalizingly elusive. Leaving the bakery and brewery section, you move into what seems like a dedicated pantry area for finer goods, the place for snacks, the little indulgences. The air here is cooler, and the shelves are perhaps a bit more organized. This is where you'd find the ingredients to satisfy a craving for something sweet or savory between the main meals. And for sweetness in ancient Egypt, before the arrival of sugarcane, honey was king. You see several large, sealed amphorae, their clay stoppers secured with beeswax, and perhaps impressed with a noble's seal. This isn't just any honey. This is likely high-quality stuff, golden and fragrant, painstakingly collected from wild desert hives or from carefully tended apiaries consisting of cylindrical clay hives stacked horizontally. The effort involved in collecting it, especially wild honey, would have made it a precious commodity. Imagine the bravery of those who climbed cliffs or smoked out bees to get this liquid gold. They probably deserved a medal, or at least an extra ration of figs. Beside the honey, you see baskets piled high with dates. These are not the small, somewhat dry dates you might find in a plastic container at the supermarket. These are plump, sticky, and glistening, ranging in color from deep amber to almost black. Some are fresh, soft, and incredibly sweet. Others are sun-dried to a chewy perfection, their sugars concentrated. Dates were incredibly versatile, eaten as is, pitted and stuffed, chopped and added to breads and cakes, or mashed into a thick, sweet paste that served as a binder and sweetener for many confections. You reach out and touch one. Its skin is thin and slightly wrinkled, yielding to the slightest pressure. You can almost taste that intense caramel-like sweetness. Figs, too, are abundant, piled high in wide, shallow willow baskets. Some are fresh, their purple or green skins taut, promising a burst of seedy, jammy goodness within. Others are dried, flattened, and perhaps strung together, a convenient and portable snack. These fruits were nature's candy, readily available and packed with energy. A perfect pick-me-up for a busy pharaoh. One of the more curious items you might encounter in this royal pantry, often found as offerings in tombs as well, is a collection of small, wrinkled, brownish tubers. These are Cyperus esculentus, commonly known as tiger nuts or earth almonds. They aren't nuts at all, but the edible tubers of a sedge plant that grew abundantly along the Nile. You see some soaking in a bowl of water, plumping up. Others might be laid out on a mat, drying in a warm spot. They have a unique flavor profile, slightly sweet, nutty, a little earthy, with a chewy texture. An interesting mainstream fact here is that tiger nuts are now recognized as a superfood due to their high fiber, iron, and magnesium content. The ancient Egyptians were clearly onto something good, thousands of years before health food stores became a trend. They could have started the first paleo diet fad. These tiger nuts could be eaten raw after soaking, roasted, or ground into a fine flour to be added to breads or cakes, lending a subtle sweetness and a pleasant textural element. Sometimes they were even pressed to produce a sweet, milky drink, a sort of ancient nut milk. An odd detail that has emerged from archaeological analysis of mummified remains is the presence of worn teeth in many ancient Egyptians, not just from grit in their bread. Sand from the grinding stones was a common, unwelcome ingredient, but also potentially from chewing on tough foods like dried tiger nuts or other fibrous plant materials. So, while nutritious, these snacks might have come with a dental cost. Scholars still debate the precise role and prevalence of certain wilder or less cultivated food sources in the elite Egyptian diet. While staples like wheat, barley, dates, and figs were clearly cultivated and formed the core, to what extent did pharaohs and their courts rely on or enjoy foraged items like tiger nuts, lotus seeds, and roots, or other wild plants? Were these everyday items, occasional delicacies, or famine foods elevated by royal preference? The lines are often blurred, and the archaeological record, while rich, doesn't always give us the full menu with all its daily variations. You continue to wander deeper into the storage complex, past stacks of more utilitarian pottery, towards an area that seems to be for more specialized items. Here, the clay pots and jars are often smaller, and some bear incised markings or small dockets of clay or wood attached by cord. These are hieratic script, the cursive form of hieroglyphs used for everyday record-keeping. These labels might detail the contents: finest oasis figs, honey from the western apiary, spiced wine, year 5 of His Majesty, and sometimes the origin, the supplier, or the year of harvest. This was a surprisingly sophisticated inventory system for the time, crucial for managing the vast quantities of foodstuffs required by the palace. It wasn't quite a barcode scanner at the royal checkout, but it was certainly efficient for keeping track of the royal nibbles and ensuring that Pharaoh Akhenaten's favorite batch of sun-dried raisins from that one specific vineyard hadn't been accidentally diverted by a cheeky junior scribe with a sweet tooth. You can just picture a harried pantry steward, a bit like a stressed-out restaurant manager, with a papyrus checklist in hand, trying to make sure everything is accounted for and that the divine offerings are up to standard. The air cools slightly as you move towards a section evidently used for storing oils and fats. Large pottery jars, some partially buried in the cool earth floor to maintain a more stable temperature, would have held various types of oil. Olive oil was certainly known and used, though perhaps not as ubiquitously as in the Aegean world. More common might have been moringa oil, extracted from the seeds of the moringa tree, known for its stability and pleasant, mild flavor. Sesame oil and castor oil also had their uses, both culinary and medicinal. These oils weren't just for frying or cooking in the way we might think. They were used for flavoring dishes, for preserving foods, creating a seal against air, as a base for perfumes and ointments, and yes, for adding richness and moisture to baked goods. Imagine a small, dense cake, sweetened with date paste and honey, perhaps spiced with a hint of cinnamon or cardamom traded from distant lands, its texture made tender and satisfying by the addition of a little moringa oil, and then studded with those chopped tiger nuts, or perhaps some imported almonds. That sounds like a snack genuinely fit for a sun god, or at least a very important person with a highly discerning palate and a team of chefs dedicated to their every culinary whim. It's fascinating to think how these simple, natural ingredients were combined with care and skill to create flavors and textures that pleased the most powerful people on Earth thousands of years ago. So, we've explored the royal pantry, a treasure trove of raw ingredients, the building blocks of pharaonic gastronomy. But now, let's move from the potential to the actual, from the promise on the shelves to the finished products. What kind of actual snacks, lovingly prepared and artfully presented, would you find on a gleaming gilded platter, offered to a pharaoh as they reclined on their cushioned divan? Perhaps they're idly watching the sacred Nile flow languidly by through a grand portico, its waters shimmering under the Egyptian sun. Or maybe they're seeking a little comfort food after a particularly stressful session of decreeing laws, managing an empire, or, dealing with a plague of particularly opinionated frogs. It's not like they could just dial up their ancient Egyptian equivalent of Uber Eats and order a pizza. Or could they? Well, not pizza as we know it, with its melted mozzarella and tomato sauce, but the idea of specialized flatbreads adorned with various toppings, perhaps some chopped vegetables, a sprinkle of herbs, or a smear of seasoned fava bean paste, wasn't entirely out of the question. These could have been the distant ancestors of the Italian delight, a quick, customizable bite. Our best and most tangible guide to what these royal personages nibbled on comes rather poignantly from the grave. Archaeological evidence from tombs is invaluable here. The ancient Egyptians, as we know, held a profound belief in the afterlife and meticulously prepared for it. They believed that the deceased, especially a pharaoh, would need all the comforts of their earthly existence to successfully navigate the underworld and enjoy eternity. This, crucially, included sustenance. So, they were often buried with a veritable feast of actual food and drink, carefully preserved or represented by incredibly detailed models and painted depictions on the tomb walls. And the logic is pretty sound. If it was deemed good enough, essential enough, for an eternity of divine existence, it was probably pretty good for a Tuesday afternoon craving, back when they were still breathing our air. It's like packing your ultimate cosmic lunchbox. Within these silent tombs, alongside miniature boats to sail the celestial Nile and protective amulets, we've found an array of preserved foodstuffs. Loaves of bread, of course, in astonishing varieties, are common. But we also find evidence of roasted fowl. Ducks, geese, and pigeons were particular favorites, often cooked, then carefully deboned, preserved, sometimes even mummified themselves, and wrapped in linen to accompany their owner into the great beyond. A mainstream historical fact is the sheer quantity and variety of these food offerings found in wealthier tombs, indicating not just a symbolic gesture, but a genuine attempt to provide a full menu for the afterlife. Now, while a whole roasted goose, glistening with its own fat and stuffed with aromatic herbs, might constitute more of a main meal, smaller portions of these birds, or perhaps specially prepared, bite-sized morsels of poultry, could certainly have served as a hearty and satisfying snack. Imagine your pharaoh, perhaps feeling a bit peckish mid-afternoon, delicately picking at a tender piece of roasted quail. The quail, a small, flavorsome bird, would have been plucked, dressed, and perhaps marinated in a little oil, honey, and crushed coriander and cumin, spices readily available and beloved in Egyptian cuisine. Then, it would be roasted over an open fire or in a clay oven until its skin was crisp and golden brown. The meat, succulent and subtly spiced, would be a delightful contrast of textures and tastes. An odd detail sometimes gleaned from analyses or depictions is the potential for highly individualized seasoning preferences. Just like today someone might insist on no onions, perhaps a particular pharaoh had a known aversion to too much garlic or an insatiable desire for extra dill on their waterfowl. More cumin for the divine one, the head chef might exclaim. Historians still debate the frequency and context of meat consumption, especially finer poultry, as snacks for the elite. Were these choice morsels an everyday indulgence, readily available whenever the pharaonic stomach rumbled? Or were they reserved for slightly more formal, albeit still casual dining occasions, perhaps shared with a close confidant or a favored pet baboon? The line between a substantial snack and a light meal can be quite blurry, and the logistics of constantly having perfectly roasted quail on standby, even for a god king, would have been considerable. Then, of course, we enter the realm of cakes and sweetmeats, the true heartland of ancient snacking. And when we say cakes, you need to erase from your mind the image of light, fluffy, multi-layered sponge cakes, frosted with buttercream that you might pick up from a modern bakery. Ancient Egyptian cakes, or shiset, were generally much denser, richer, often unleavened or only slightly leavened by wild yeasts, and intensely flavored with the natural sweetness of honey, dates, and sometimes other fruits and spices. Think more along the lines of a very moist, heavy fruitcake, or a particularly decadent energy bar. One of the most popular types, reconstructed from tomb offerings and depicted in countless reliefs, seems to have been a relatively simple but undoubtedly delicious mixture of ground grain, most commonly emmer wheat or barley, the foundational cereals of their agriculture, rich date paste for sweetness and binding, and generous amounts of golden honey. This mixture would be kneaded together, perhaps with a little water or oil to achieve the right consistency, then shaped by hand into small individual cakes, lozenges, or even molded into special pottery forms. These forms could be quite whimsical, shaped like animals, human figures, or geometric patterns, adding an element of artistry to these everyday treats. Once shaped, they were often baked on hot stones, placed at the edge of a fire, in the embers themselves, or within those versatile clay ovens until they were firm and perhaps slightly caramelized on the outside. You can almost smell that incredible aroma of baking grains, honey, and dates, a scent that must have wafted through the palace corridors, a constant reminder of the good things life had to offer. You might find these fundamental honey date cakes further enhanced with other delightful additions. Those tiger nuts we discussed earlier, with their slightly chewy texture and nutty sweetness, were a common inclusion, chopped and mixed into the dough. If the pharaoh was feeling particularly extravagant, or if recent trade caravans had been favorable, these cakes might also be studded with chopped almonds or pistachios. These nuts weren't native to Egypt in large quantities and often had to be imported, making them luxury items. So, a cake generously filled with pistachios would have been a clear statement of wealth and access to exotic goods. It's the ancient equivalent of someone casually offering you a snack, sprinkled with saffron or white truffles. "Oh, this old thing. Just a few imported pistachios, darling." One particular recipe for a type of flat, almost biscuit-like cake has been tentatively reconstructed by Egyptologists based on analyses of residues found in ancient baking pottery and depictions of offerings. This confection seems to have involved barley flour, honey, and quite possibly some kind of fruit puree, perhaps fig or grape, to add moisture and another layer of flavor. These ingredients would be mixed into a relatively stiff dough, rolled or pressed flat, and then baked until crisp, perhaps on a greased griddle or a hot, flat stone. It sounds remarkably simple, yet the combination of the nutty, earthy barley, the intense sweetness of the honey, and the tang of the fruit puree would have created a very satisfying, chewy, and enduring snack. Honestly, it probably had more actual nutritional value and genuine flavor than many of our modern, highly processed health bars that taste vaguely of sweetened cardboard. The Egyptians knew a thing or two about natural goodness. Now, here's where things get even more intriguing and a little mysterious. A rather curious detail that emerges from some highly scientific analyses of food residues, particularly from those sweet confections, is the potential use of certain flower petals or aromatic plant parts. While not as overtly documented in texts or depictions as honey or dates, trace elements and botanical markers suggesting the inclusion of plants like chamomile, various types of lotus, whose seeds and roots were also known to be consumed, or even parts of the acacia tree have been found in some ancient cakes. Imagine a delicate honey cake, not just sweet, but also carrying a subtle, almost ethereal floral aroma or a slightly herby note. This adds a layer of sophisticated gastronomy to their snacking habits. Egyptologists and archaeobotanists continue to discuss and debate the exact preparation methods and the reasons behind the inclusion of these less common botanical ingredients in food. Was it purely for a unique flavor profile, a subtle aromatic enhancement that pleased the royal palate? Or did these specific plants carry ritualistic or symbolic significance, making their inclusion in food offered to a divine king particularly appropriate? Perhaps they were believed to possess certain medicinal properties. Chamomile, for instance, has long been associated with calming effects. Could these have been the first functional foods, designed not just to satiate hunger, but also to impart a specific benefit or mood? The evidence is often indirect, relying on microscopic analysis and educated guesswork, leaving a whisper of forgotten botanical knowledge and culinary secrets that we are only just beginning to rediscover. It makes you wonder what other secret ingredients a pharaoh's chef might have experimented with. A pinch of blue lotus for serenity, Your Majesty. Of course, no discussion of ancient Egyptian snacks would be complete without mentioning the abundance of fresh fruits they enjoyed. Beyond the ubiquitous dates and figs, their fertile lands along the Nile, irrigated by its life-giving waters, produced a wonderful variety. Grapes, both dark purple and lighter green varieties, were cultivated extensively, eaten fresh from the vine or sun-dried into sweet, chewy raisins that would have been a convenient and portable energy booster. Pomegranates, with their tough, leathery skin, concealing hundreds of jewel-like ruby-red seeds bursting with tart sweet juice, were highly prized, both for their flavor and their symbolic associations with fertility and abundance. You can imagine a pharaoh patiently picking out the arils, each one a tiny explosion of flavor. Melons, too, watermelons, and perhaps other varieties similar to cantaloupes would have offered a refreshing, hydrating treat, especially during the hot summer months. The sheer sweetness and juiciness of a ripe melon slice must have been pure bliss. These fruits would often have been served chilled, a remarkable feat in a hot climate before the invention of refrigeration. How did they manage this? One common method was to store them in porous clay jars. Water would be allowed to seep through the clay and evaporate from the outer surface, and this process of evaporation would cool the contents within the jar. It's a simple but effective principle of physics, cleverly harnessed. So, picture your pharaoh, perhaps relaxing in a shaded garden pavilion, fanned gently by servants wielding large ostrich feather fans. Another attendant approaches, bearing a magnificent golden or polished alabaster bowl piled high with glistening bunches of chilled grapes, segments of juicy melon, and the vibrant red of pomegranate arils. It's a scene of serene indulgence, a quiet moment of cool refreshment in a sun-drenched land. A mainstream fact is the critical role of such irrigated horticulture in providing a diverse and nutritious diet for the Egyptian population, at least for those with access. Did they ever have food fights with the grapes, you wonder? Probably not. Too much divine decorum involved, one supposes, when you're considered a living embodiment of Horus. Still, it's a fun image, a slightly less stuffy pharaoh, perhaps a young Tutankhamun, having a grape-throwing contest with his favorite courtiers. One can dream. And then, there's the rather surprising matter of cheese. Yes, cheese. While ancient Egypt might not immediately spring to mind as a major cheese-producing civilization in the same way as parts of Europe, evidence strongly suggests that they made and consumed cheese. This was likely to have been fresh, soft cheeses, made from goats' or cows' milk, perhaps with sheep's milk also used. Think of something similar in texture and style to a modern fresh feta, a creamy ricotta, or perhaps a simple paneer-like pressed curd cheese. The discovery of pottery vessels with perforations, strongly resembling cheese strainers, and chemical analysis of residues found in ancient jars have confirmed the presence of dairy processing. Small, crumbly pieces of this fresh cheese, perhaps lightly salted, would have made for a delightful savory snack. To elevate it further, these cheese morsels might have been drizzled with a little golden honey, creating that wonderful sweet savory contrast that is still beloved today. Or they could have been served alongside a few plump dates or fresh figs, the sweetness of the fruit complementing the tangy, creamy cheese. An odd detail is that some tomb paintings appear to depict the process of cheese making, showing figures handling milk and what look like cheese molds, giving us visual clues to their techniques. Scholars still debate the scale and sophistication of the Egyptian dairy industry, particularly concerning cheese production. Was it a common household activity, or was there more centralized, perhaps even palace-controlled, production of finer cheeses for the elite? And what specific types or styles did they perfect beyond the simple, fresh varieties? It's quite something to think of a pharaoh enjoying what was essentially an ancient cheese plate, thousands of years before the French turned it into a high art form. Finally, we cannot overlook the crucial element of presentation. For the ancient Egyptians, and especially for the pharaoh, the aesthetic aspect of food was paramount. These snacks wouldn't just be haphazardly thrown onto a generic plate. Even for a casual nibble, beauty and artistry mattered. Food would have been served in beautifully painted ceramic bowls, often adorned with intricate geometric patterns, scenes of nature, or hieroglyphic inscriptions. Dishes made of polished alabaster, with its smooth, cool translucence, or even faience, that distinctive Egyptian glazed earthenware in vibrant blues and greens, would have been used to present these royal treats. The colors of the food itself, the textures, the careful arrangement on the serving vessel, it was all part of the holistic experience. You weren't just eating to satisfy hunger, you were partaking in an act that reflected your divine status, the bounty of the land you ruled, and the skill of the artisans and chefs who served you. Each snack was a miniature work of art, a feast for the eyes as well as the palate. It's a good reminder that food has always been about more than just fuel, its culture, its art, its pleasure. So, we've journeyed through the bustling royal pantries, explored the raw ingredients, and even sampled, in our imaginations at least, some of the delectable finished snacks that might have graced a pharaoh's gilded platter. But these carefully crafted morsels, these sweet honey cakes, savory roasted quails, and refreshing chilled fruits, were so much more than just a way to tide over a divine ruler's hunger between the main, more formal meals. For the pharaohs of ancient Egypt, these snacks were deeply interwoven with concepts of ritual, expressions of status, and perhaps even what we might now recognize as a form of emotional eating or comfort food. After all, even a living god must have had days when only a perfectly ripe fig or a familiar honeyed treat would do. The very act of providing such a variety and quality of snacks for the pharaoh, ensuring their every culinary whim could be catered to, was in itself a powerful statement. It was a tangible reflection of the prosperity and stability of the kingdom. A well-stocked palace, capable of producing an endless array of delightful foods, symbolized the fertility of the lands under the pharaoh's control, the efficiency of his administration, and the skill of his people. A well-fed pharaoh, content and satisfied, was presumably a happier pharaoh. And a happy pharaoh, one would hope, made for a more benevolent and effective ruler. At least, that was probably the fervent hope whispered in the royal kitchens amongst the clatter of pots and the pounding of dough. Keep His Majesty pleased with the fig paste, and perhaps he won't decree another ridiculously oversized obelisk this week. One can almost hear a weary headbaker mutter. The most profound illustration of the significance of these specific food items, including those we'd classify as snacks, comes from their prominent role in funerary practices. The ancient Egyptians, as we've touched upon, had an elaborate and deeply held belief system concerning the afterlife. A central tenet was that the Ka, an individual's life force or spiritual double, continued to exist after death and required sustenance, just as the living did. Therefore, tombs, especially those of pharaohs and high-ranking nobles, were equipped not just with treasures and tools, but with abundant food offerings. This is a mainstream historical fact. These weren't just token gestures. Often vast quantities of real, preserved food items, from bread and beer to meat, poultry, fruits, and cakes, were carefully arranged to accompany the deceased on their journey into eternity. An odd detail in this context is the occasional discovery of mummified food. Just as human and animal bodies were preserved, so too were some food items, particularly prized cuts of meat or whole fowl, sometimes deboned, treated with natron, and wrapped in linen, intended to last for an eternity. It's a rather literal interpretation of food that keeps. Imagine an afterlife pantry stocked with jerky that's several millennia old. You'd certainly hope the divine digestion was up to the task. Scholars still debate the precise understanding the ancient Egyptians had regarding these food offerings. Was it believed that the Ka literally consumed the physical substance of the food? Or was it the essence, the spiritual counterpart of the food, that was nourishing the deceased? Perhaps it was a combination, or maybe the act of offering itself was paramount, a demonstration of continued care and remembrance. Whatever the exact belief, the presence of these specific snacks, the honey cakes, the dates, the figs, in such a sacred context, underscores how central they were considered to an ideal, enjoyable existence, both in this life and, crucially, in the next. If you're packing for eternity, you only pack your absolute favorites, right? The specificity of some of these offerings also hints at personal preferences and a high degree of connoisseurship, even in what we might consider simple snacks. We touched on King Tutankhamun's tomb, for instance, which famously contained over 30 large jars of wine. These weren't just generic wine. Many were meticulously labeled with the vintage, the vineyard of origin, like House of Aton of the Western River, and even the name of the chief vintner. This is akin to a modern wine aficionado's meticulously curated cellar. While wine isn't strictly a snack in itself, this attention to detail and quality strongly suggests that similar discernment would have applied to preferred foods. It's easy to imagine that a particular pharaoh might have been known for their extreme fondness for a specific type of honey cake, perhaps one made with honey from a particular region known for its unique floral source, or figs grown only in a certain royal oasis. No, those are the common figs. His Majesty requires the figs from the sunken garden of Amun, the ones kissed by the morning dew. You can almost hear the exasperated royal taster explaining it to a new kitchen apprentice. This then leads to another fascinating area of scholarly discussion. To what extent were these delightful snacks an everyday, on-demand indulgence for a pharaoh, versus items that, despite their seeming simplicity, were reserved for specific, perhaps more ritualized moments or special occasions? While the pharaoh undoubtedly had access to the best of everything the kingdom could produce, daily life in the palace was still governed by routines, protocols, and religious observances. Were these sweet cakes, choice fruits, and savory morsels available 24/7, like a divine minibar constantly restocked by an army of servants? Or were they brought out at particular times of day, perhaps after specific religious duties were performed by the pharaoh, or to be shared when honoring important guests or family members? The line between casual, everyday consumption and more formal, ritualistic partaking can be quite blurry, especially when dealing with a figure who was simultaneously a head of state, a chief priest, and a living god. It's a bit like wondering if the Pope ever just kicks back with a bag of chips while watching TV. We might imagine it, but the reality of such lives is often more structured than we assume. Yet, amidst all the grandeur, the ritual, and the immense responsibility, it's also important to remember the human element. Imagine the pharaoh, perhaps Ramesses the Great, after a long day on the chariot reviewing his troops, or Hatshepsut, after deftly navigating complex political negotiations. In a quiet moment, away from the public gaze, a trusted servant approaches, bearing a small, familiar tray. On it, a few perfectly ripe, chilled figs, their skins glistening. A small, honeyed cake, still faintly warm from the palace ovens. It sent a comforting aroma from childhood, and a goblet of cool water or light, refreshing beer. That moment of quiet indulgence, a small, simple comfort in a life that, despite its unparalleled power and wealth, was also undoubtedly heavy with expectation and isolation. It's a profoundly human moment, one that transcends the millennia and the golden trappings of royalty. These weren't just calories or status symbols at that point. They were little moments of personal pleasure, of normalcy, even for someone who was, by definition, anything but normal. It's the ancient Egyptian equivalent of curling up with your favorite snack after a tough day, a universal experience. And what of the creators of these delectable delights? The royal bakers, chefs, and confectioners must have worked under considerable pressure, their livelihoods, and perhaps even their lives, dependent on pleasing the divine palate. Yet, there must also have been immense pride in their craft, in their ability to transform simple, natural ingredients into dishes worthy of a god. They were artists in their own right, their medium being flour, honey, fruits, and spices. Perhaps there were celebrated chefs whose names were whispered with reverence within the palace walls, innovators who introduced a new way of spicing a cake or a novel presentation for fruit, earning them royal favor. Did you try Chef Tamos's new date and almond slivers today? Positively divine, my dear, one courtier might whisper to another. The legacy of these ancient Egyptian flavors and food preferences is not entirely lost to the sands of time. If you travel in modern Egypt, particularly in the Nile Valley, you can still find echoes of these ancient tastes. The cultivation of dates and figs remains a vital part of agriculture, and these fruits are consumed with the same relish. Honey is still a prized natural sweetener. Breads, though different in many ways, still form a cornerstone of the diet. While the exact recipes of a pharaoh's favorite snack cake might have vanished, the fundamental appreciation for these natural bounties, for simple, wholesome ingredients transformed into something delicious, persists. You can almost taste the continuity, a faint, sweet echo of a pharaoh's quiet satisfaction when you bite into a date-filled cookie from a Cairo bakery or enjoy a perfectly ripe mango on a hot summer day. It's a subtle reminder that while empires rise and fall, dynasties fade, and languages evolve, the simple, profound joy of a good snack, of something tasty that brings a moment of pleasure, is truly eternal. It connects us to these figures from the distant past in a very tangible and relatable way. They may have worn golden sandals and commanded nations, but they also knew the simple pleasure of a sweet treat. And so, as the echoes of ancient feasts and pharaonic whispers gently recede, as the taste of honeyed dates and spiced cakes fades from our imagined senses, allow yourself to drift even further into tranquility. The vibrant scenes of Egypt's golden age, the bustling kitchens, the serene garden pavilions, all begin to soften now, like a watercolor painting touched by a gentle mist, becoming less distinct, more dreamlike, as you prepare for your own quiet repose. Let your mind float away from the intricate details of history, away from the grandeur of pyramids and the weight of golden crowns. Settle into the peaceful stillness that is enveloping you, a comforting blanket of quiet. Feel any lingering tension you might be holding in your shoulders, your jaw, perhaps even in your temples. Just dissolve. Let it melt away with each slow, easy breath you take, each exhalation carrying with it any remaining thoughts or worries from your day, leaving you lighter and more at ease. Imagine the vast, velvet expanse of the desert night sky, sprinkled with countless diamond-like stars, the very same stars that once gazed down upon those ancient palaces and the sleeping forms of kings and queens. There is a profound and ancient stillness in that immense darkness, a deep, resonant quiet that has absorbed the whispers of millennia. Allow that profound quiet to seep into your being, a calming, soothing balm for a mind that is now ready for rest. The gentle, rhythmic lapping of the distant Nile, the soft, sighing rustle of palm leaves in a barely there breeze. These are the only sounds now, and they are deeply, deeply lulling, guiding you effortlessly towards the shores of sleep. You are enveloped in safety, cocooned in comfort, and you are drifting easily and serenely towards a night of profound and restorative sleep. The tales and tastes of ancient Egypt have played their gentle part, offering a fascinating little journey for your mind before it settles into its own well-deserved quietude. There are no more demands on your attention, no more details to recall, only the soft, sweet invitation to let go completely. Surrender to the comforting softness of your bed, the quiet stillness of your room, and the peaceful promise of deep, uninterrupted slumber that awaits you now. Good night.